Hey, everybody. This is the recording or the tape for 19th century art number one. These will all be full 19th century. So this is the reading. This is the video for the class on Friday, April 10th. So, all right, we're going to start out with a female artist, somebody who actually rose to quite a bit of acclaim in her time, was very, very successful, quite an entrepreneur. She was in France. She was a French woman. Her name was Marie Louise Elizabeth Viguet Lebrun. Quite a mouthful, right? The piece that we're looking at on the screen right now is a portrait that she did for Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was one of her most famous, obviously, and her best clients. She was somebody who commissioned quite a few portraits from Marie Louise Elizabeth Viguet-Lebrun, and made her very, very successful. And it's interesting, this is not the AP piece. I'm going to show you a few other pieces before we get to that. But it's interesting how nimble Marie Louise had to be in order to survive this time frame. So as you can see, this painting dated 1787. So this is a little bit before the 19th century. We're going back a little bit in time. She started out as a painter for French royalty, which then, of course, came to an abrupt halt when the French Revolution happened. And she had to completely reinvent her career. So it's kind of interesting. So she was one of the most successful artists in the 18th century, in 18th century Europe. She was one of the very few women at the time who was admitted to the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture. And she was admitted early. She was a prodigy at the age of 28. She was trained by her father, who was a painter, and began painting as a young girl, and received her first commission at age 15. She was married to an important art dealer, Jean-Baptiste Lebrun, and then her career really took off after she married him, because, of course, he promoted her work. And he was able to show off his wife's ability in their fashionable Parisian home, where they entertained the wealthy and powerful. She painted actually 30 portraits of Marie Antoinette. And she was her official court painter, and it was this connection that really got her launched as a young 20-something into 30-something painter. So let's just stop for a sec and talk about this painting. As you can see, the Marie Antoinette is painted in a very particular way, and one of the things you might know, you guys know about Marie Antoinette. She was the one who famously was supposed to say, "Let them eat cake," about the rioting French poor outside of her palace. But I think we all believe that she was woefully misrepresented, but it didn't matter. She still was, her husband was overthrown, and she lost her head. This painting was painted at a time when she was really hoping to try to revive her reputation. And as you can see, even though she's being painted as extremely wealthy, she's got this really fancy outfit in this grand setting in the palace, but she's also being shown as a loving mother. You can see her children draped around her and yanking on her lace. Her little daughter is leaning into her and adoringly. And you'll also notice that her little son is holding open an empty crib and an empty bassinet, which is meant to imply that she is mourning a lost child. And she was hoping, of course, that this would help her be more relatable to other people, because she too had suffered something. She's opulent, but she looks strong. She looks self-possessed. So let's think about this portrait a little bit stylistically. And I'm going to introduce you to a style that we haven't talked about yet. This was a style that grew out of the Rococo style. And so this was a style that was popular in the late 1700s. And so the 1700s was when the Rococo style was popular, but it went out of fashion pretty quickly as being really way too frivolous. And this next style kind of took its place. It was still very textural, very lush, very elaborate, beautifully painted. And this style was called Grand Manner, where people were shown in this very kind of elaborate way. And also the Grand Manner dispensed of the Rococo's kind of cotton candy colors and adopted a more Baroque palette of deep tenebrism, but still kind of hanging on to the to the beautiful textures and complex the complex compositions. It was more serious, not so light, not so frivolous, and it's still very, very elegant, but not quite so wispy. So Marie Antoinette's made to look very, very stable, very good mom, and this was good propaganda for her. This portrait was actually created after the French Revolution. So Marie-Louise had gotten out of Paris, and she had got out by the skin of her teeth. The crowds wanted her too because she was associated with the court. But she was able to get out at the last minute, and then she actually lived in Italy as an expatriate for many years. She created this painting in Rome while she was there as an expatriate for about a decade. And the article in Khan Academy says this is an example of late Rococo style, so a little bit more serious, like I was saying. So let's go on and look at a few more in this slideshow. I'm always not quite sure how I'm gonna. Here we go. This is another portrait of Marie Antoinette, and another again of Marie Antoinette painted by Marie-Louise. And as you can see, this one is definitely a little bit more Rococo in flavor, and a little bit lighter palette, although the background has got that slightly more serious tone. Okay, so the one that we're going to stop and talk about that could show up on the AP is this painting by Marie-Louise Elizabeth Viguier-Lebrun. This is a self-portrait. So this is the artist working at her canvas, looking out at us, which is interesting. So this self-portrait was created in Italy while she was there working, and I'm going to stop now. I don't have them written out on the slides, but here's the question. Ready? The question that I want you to answer right here in the voice thread is: how does Viguier-Lebrun's self-portrait, what does it say about her? How does she show herself? What does she want us to think about her? So I'd like for you to think, what maybe each of you can name two ways, two things that she's asking us to consider as we consider her. And I want you to think about not only how she portrays herself and what she's doing, what she's wearing, but also her expression, the position that she's in. Does it relate to other artists? So I want you to think about all the ways that she's, getting the viewer to think about her in a particular way. And remember, she's using this not just to hang in her living room, but as a way to promote herself. So she's very, very intentional about how she shows herself and how she's wanting us to think of her. I'm going to scroll through, and you guys can do this too, and on the video you can stop and take a look. Here's a close-up of her face, and you can see the way that she has shown herself. It's very particular, and I hope some of you get what I'm pointing at. This is not a stodgy self-portrait. This is a very particular self-portrait. So I want you to think about all aspects of it and write it down in VoiceThread. All right, and I want to show you a couple of other self-portraits that she also painted a little bit later on. She painted this self-portrait. You can see she looks a little bit older in this, and she's being shown as kind of an interesting portrait because she is definitely being shown as a painter. She's carrying her palette and her brushes, but who would ever paint in that outfit, right? I mean, clearly she's not working, she's posing. And she's wearing a really elaborate, very, looks like a very high class, expensive dress and an elaborate hat. So she's being shown as very, very successful. She's wearing pearl drop earrings. And so here in this one, she's really trying hard to put across her high society looks, and she was in fact a member of the high society, and she was able to even rejoin society when she finally came back to Paris well after the revolution, another decade later. So there's this one, and now look at this one, super interesting. Here she is with her daughter. And so just like Marie Antoinette, whom she had painted earlier, now she's showing herself as this loving mother. And interesting how she's no longer showing herself wearing the elegant contemporary dress, but she's putting herself in more Greco-Roman classical clothing, which was also part of the style. Remember, at this point, we were turning towards neoclassicism. So she's kind of moving into that next style. She's showing her adaptability, which is kind of interesting. All right, so we're gonna move on. We've already talked about the 19th century a little bit. She was another one of the painters like David, who we've already talked about, and also like Ingres, worked over that turn of the century. Okay. All right. So now we're going to stop and talk about another painter who worked in the early part of the 19th century. This is Francisco Goya, who worked in Spain. He was a Spanish painter. He was he's probably one of the most famous Spanish painters of all time, maybe second only to Velázquez, who we've already studied during the Baroque period. And so Goya worked in Spain for the royal family nearly 200 years after Velázquez. And Goya, so we've talked about the turn of the century and how the first style that we see that happens in the 19th century is neoclassicism. And we're going to talk more about that. Actually, we talked about the American neoclassicism and everything. This is a real movement that's happening at the beginning. But very quickly on its heels, especially in Europe, there comes another style, which we call Romanticism. And this style had a lot to do with the politics that were happening in Europe and the United States, as well as just changes in attitude and fashion. Okay, so Goya was formally trained in Spain and then later went to Italy to finish his training and his apprenticeship. He was the next big talent to come. He began as a Rococo-style portrait painter and tapestry designer before coming into his mature style. And I'm going to go forward. He is very well known as a printmaker as well. This is The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. And this was a piece that he made. He made many, many prints. And often they were extremely political in nature. And he lived through some of the darkest periods of Spanish history, like the Inquisition, and also the attack of the French and Napoleon's forces into Spain. And it was a really rough time, and he documents it well in his art. And we will eventually get to the piece that is on the AP, but this one isn't it. I'm going to show you one of his very early paintings that he did for the French court. This is the family of Charles IV. Charles IV is the king, who is standing in the center right in the black, very, very ornate outfit. And as you can see, I think you can see, this is a painting that Goya did after his hero, Velázquez. And I'm sure you can see the similarities in the composition. So note where Goya is in this painting. He has included himself in the painting. You can see over on the far left, he's kind of in the shadows back there. Um, a little bit like Velázquez included himself in the painting. Now let's go back though. There's a lot of differences between the two. Yes, we have the curved, we have the angled canvas in the painting, and we have Goya looking out towards us. But notice that he hasn't set up that whole kind of interesting mystical who's the painting of this group or that group. He is clearly painting this group that's in front of us, even though it would be absolutely impossible to paint this painting that we're looking at from this position where he is behind them. It's kind of interesting. Another comparison, another thing to think about is the fact that he has included himself in the painting, just like Velázquez did. But you'll notice that although both of them have an attitude of, like, you know, very, very serious, very professional, looking out, doing their work, looking out towards the viewer, the relationship of the artists with the family seems quite different. So this painting should remind you of Las Meninas, but I want you to think about how it's different. I'm not going to stop and ask you a question yet, but it is pretty different. Do you think he has the same close relationship with this family? And do you think he even likes this family? I would ask you in your own mind to think of 5 signs from looking at this that might tell you he doesn't really like them that much. Notice how he paints them. Yeah, they're very wealthy. They have a huge castle. They are wearing amazingly fancy clothes. They're decorated and beribboned and medaled and all that kind of stuff. They're kind of tall and proud and haughty. But look at their expressions. Look at the way that they interact with each other, with the viewer, with Goya. Notice how they really don't interact. Well, let's take a look at them individually a little bit here. If you can see the whole grouping on the far right over here seem kind of out of it. They don't seem connected very much. And if you move over here to the king, you can see that he actually looks kind of like a vacant, pompous guy. He doesn't even have a very intelligent look on his face. He looks kind of like a little bit, you know, idiotic. Whoop, let's go back. Uh-oh, I keep putting it forward. All right, one more back. But over here, his wife, you notice that she's not looking at us head on. She's got her head turned away from us in that kind of slightly suspicious look. And look at how she is making eye contact with the viewer. Oh, I cannot make it stay still. But not a friendly look, not an open look, definitely a kind of a suspicious look. This woman looks like the more intelligent of the two. She's now, you know, kind of grasping her daughter close to her and holding the hand of her little son. And look at his face, kind of a little malevolent, right? He's kind of looking at you again with this look of mistrust, as if, you know, he definitely doesn't know that you mean him any good. We have this other, I guess it's an older daughter or some other relative, not even looking at us. So he's actually painted the side/back of her head, which is incredibly unflattering. We have grandma over here, who not only has a giant mole on her temple, but she's got a kind of a wide-eyed stare that makes her look almost crazy. And then we have the kind of arrogant, haughty look of the young princes who will be the kings. And this is all painted when they're this age. It's interesting that history does play them out to be despots, not to be good rulers. So it's interesting that Goya paints them. He's their court painter, but he doesn't have that loving, close relationship with the family. And in fact, it's interesting. He accepted the king accepted this portrait of the family, and it hangs in the Prado, but it's not very flattering of the family. Kind of interesting. Okay, we're going to pause and talk about this painting a little bit more. It's arguably one of Goya's most famous paintings. And it too isn't the one on the AP, but the one on the AP is related to it. So I'm going to stop and talk here. And this is where I'm going to ask you guys a question. So first, let's talk about it. This was his execution of the 3rd of May, 1808 in Madrid. That's the title. It's a very large oil on canvas. It's 13 feet 4 inches across, and almost 9 feet, 8 feet 9 inches vertical. So this later painting is of a social outrage that occurred during this time. The soldiers of Napoleon who there was an uprising in Spain, and the king invited the Napoleonic forces to come into Spain to help him wipe out the revolution, and get rid of and they did. They came in. The soldiers of Napoleon occupied Spain in 1808, and they actually forced out the king, Charles IV. And then the Spaniards, they thought, oh, this is good, because they hated this king. He was a bad king. But then they seized control of Spain, and they did not want the French forces in Spain. They didn't want the French to be in control of Spain. And so, right away, the Spanish people realized, okay, these Napoleonic forces in our country is a bad thing. And they rose up against Napoleon and his forces. And Napoleon and his soldiers brutally put them down. And this is a painting of a famous execution that happened on May 8th, after this revolution was put down. So obviously you can see that the French Napoleonic forces are in a firing squad, and they're just killing these Spanish revolutionaries, which is, in a really brutal way. And it's an extremely emotional painting. This is a great example of romantic painting style. And it's not just the style, it's the content. As you can see, it has an absolute political agenda. It has a political point of view. It's the point of view of the rebels against the powers that be. And I want you to look at it in terms of composition, color, light source, and style. So here's the question. So we'll talk about this in class next week too. This is a really important painting. So I want you to answer the question for me. How does Goya manipulate the way we think and see and feel about this painting by using composition, color, the tenebrism, the light and dark, and the style? Because this is a different style than we're used to seeing. Right? This is way different. Just go back a little bit. All you have to do is go back just a few years, and you'll see, we were at this not that long ago, and now we're at this. Wow, really big difference, right? So style, composition, color. And how does he make us think about this, about what's going on? Notice what he does to the French soldiers. How does he make them look like, the bad guys? It's kind of interesting. And how does he make the Spanish revolutionaries look over here? What's the source of light? Is there only one source of light? I don't think so. Yeah. I want you to think about that. So you guys, this is your second question. Please write your answer to this in VoiceThread right here at this point. Okay. So now I'm going to take you to this print, which is called "And There Is Nothing to Be Done." No Hari Remedio. Okay, that's my bad mangled Spanish. Sorry. And it is a print from his series called The Disasters of War. It's plate 15, done in 1810 to 1823. So let's go back one here. Oh, and this is another one from the same series. I'm sorry. Okay, this one was done, of course, in 1814 to 15. So this is a little bit later. This one was done in 1810, 12. It was done similar time. So both are done at a very, very similar time. And this is the actual AP piece, not the painting, which I think is an interesting choice. And I think one of the reasons they chose the print over the painting is because of the fact that it was a print and that it was widely distributed to show the horrors of war. And I want you to look at this and think about in what ways it's similar to the painting and what ways it's a little bit different, which is kind of interesting. Do you see the guns? I think it's really easy to see the guns that are right here, right? You can see the soldiers. You can see another man who's tied up to a post, and he's already been shot because he's falling down. You can see this guy actually has not been shot yet. He's still standing up. But you'll notice that the guns that are about to kill him are right here. So this is it's a really amazing composition. It's interesting. And you can see that the person before him, who was shot just before him, is still lying on the ground in a heap. And so this guy, although he's blindfolded, of course, he knows exactly what's going to happen to him. Yeah, Bonaparte tricked the king into letting the troops into Spain with the thought that he would help Spain deal with his problems in Portugal, which was giving a problem. And instead, he usurped the throne and installed his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, as the ruler of Spain. Soon there was a bloody uprising, and where countless Spaniards were slaughtered in Spain's cities and in the countryside. And although Spain eventually expelled the French in 1814, following the Peninsular War, which was a 7 years war, so it was a long war, the military conflict was long and gruesome, and a lot of people died. Throughout the entire time, Goya worked as the court artist for Joseph Bonaparte. Can you imagine? So he was working for the French installed king or governor, and trying to, making a living working for him. And on the side, he was making these paintings and these prints about the horrors of this war and what was going on. It was really interesting. He would later deny any involvement with the French government, which is also kind of interesting. All right. So finally, the Spanish do prevail. Even this is another really gruesome piece. Here's another one. You can see this was all very real. All right, I'm going to leave you with one more. And here again, he's got the weapons on the side. I'm going to leave you with one more really gruesome piece. And that is this one. This is Satan devouring his son. Very famous late painting by Francisco Goya. So after the Spanish came back and the monarchy was reestablished, the new young king Ferdinand, who was the teenage boy in blue that you saw, proved to be a really horrible king, and he exiled Goya because of his affiliation with the French. And Goya's pain and anger is, I think, quite evident in this last painting and other works like this. He's just a really fascinating painter. Okay, so I'm gonna stop this video now, and this will be the first part. So this is 19th Century 1A, and please also watch 19th Century 1B, where I'll talk about the other two works.